The story of Vault-Tec begins quietly, long before the sirens and fire, rooted in a world that believed it could plan its way out of extinction. In the years leading up to the Great War, fear became a constant companion to everyday life. News broadcasts spoke of rising tensions, political standoffs, and the possibility of nuclear conflict, yet daily routines continued as though the future could still be negotiated. Vault-Tec emerged in this climate as a promise wrapped in reassurance, presenting itself not as a corporation driven by profit or power, but as humanity's safeguard against the unthinkable. Their advertisements were bright, optimistic, and carefully designed to inspire trust, offering families a simple message: when the world ends, Vault-Tec will be ready. Publicly, Vault-Tec's purpose was straightforward. They built underground vaults meant to preserve human life during a nuclear apocalypse, sealing residents away until the surface was safe again. These vaults were presented as technological marvels, stocked with food, water, medical facilities, and entertainment systems designed to sustain entire communities for years. The smiling Vault Boy mascot became a symbol of safety, reinforcing the idea that Vault-Tec was humanity's benevolent protector. But beneath this carefully curated image lay a far more unsettling reality, one that would only become clear centuries later through scattered records, terminals, and the quiet horror left behind in the vaults themselves. In truth, very few vaults were designed to function as advertised. Vault-Tec was deeply entangled with the pre-war United States government, particularly with factions interested in long-term survival beyond Earth. Many vaults were constructed not as shelters, but as social experiments meant to test how humans would behave under extreme, artificial conditions. These experiments were intended to generate data for a future where humanity might need to colonize other planets or survive in sealed environments indefinitely. To Vault-Tec and its government partners, the residents were not simply citizens to be saved. They were test subjects, their lives carefully controlled to observe psychological, social, and biological outcomes over generations. Each vault was assigned a unique experiment, often hidden behind the appearance of normalcy. Some vaults were designed to test isolation, sealing residents inside with no knowledge of the outside world's condition. Others manipulated population dynamics, governance structures, or access to resources. In many cases, vault dwellers were never informed of these conditions, believing they were participating in a standard survival protocol. The cruelty of Vault-Tec's design lay not just in the experiments themselves, but in the deception used to recruit participants. Families entered vaults, believing they were being saved, unaware that they were stepping into controlled environments engineered to break, reshape, or erase them. The Great War came suddenly, lasting only a matter of hours. Nuclear fire swept across the world, ending modern civilization in an instant. Vault-Tec systems activated as planned, sealing vault doors and isolating thousands of communities underground. On the surface, cities burned and collapsed. Underground, the experiments began. Some vaults functioned smoothly at first, maintaining the illusion of safety. Others immediately revealed their true purpose. Vault doors were programmed never to open. Life support systems were intentionally flawed. Leadership structures were manipulated to induce conflict. Over time, the vaults became microcosms of human desperation, shaped by fear, confinement, and the knowledge that escape might never come. One of the most chilling aspects of Vault-Tec's legacy is how methodically these experiments were designed. Vault records reveal that many experiments were meant to run for decades or even centuries, far beyond the lifespan of the original residents. Vault-Tec assumed that future generations, born underground, would accept their circumstances as normal, never knowing the surface world. In doing so, Vault-Tec effectively erased entire cultures before they could form, replacing organic human development with artificial conditions dictated by corporate design. Survival, in this context, became less about preserving humanity and more about controlling it. Not all vaults failed immediately. Some maintained stability for years, even decades, before their experimental conditions began to take their toll. In certain vaults, residents were subjected to extreme overcrowding. In others, populations were intentionally limited to test genetic bottlenecks. Some vaults introduced authoritarian leadership, while others removed leadership entirely, forcing residents to self-organize under constant stress. Vault-Tec observed these outcomes remotely, collecting data without intervention, even as vault populations descended into chaos, madness, or extinction. Perhaps the most disturbing truth about Vault-Tec is that many of these experiments had no practical value by the time they concluded. The world they were meant to inform no longer existed. Space colonization programs collapsed alongside governments. Yet the experiments continued regardless, their momentum driven by automated systems and institutional inertia. Vault-Tec built mechanisms that did not know how to stop, systems designed to carry out their function even when the purpose behind them had vanished. In this way, Vault-Tec became a symbol not just of cruelty, but of a civilization unable to let go of control, even in the face of its own destruction. Centuries later, as vaults were rediscovered by wastelanders, the truth emerged piece by piece. Empty vaults told silent stories through skeletons frozen in place. Terminals revealed logs filled with fear, confusion, and betrayal. Some vaults became homes to mutated creatures or hostile factions, their original purpose long forgotten. Others remained sealed, their experiments still running in isolation, untouched by the world above. Each vault stood as a monument to Vault-Tec's ambition, a reminder that survival engineered without empathy leads not to preservation, but to suffering. Yet within this darkness, Fallout's world also shows moments of resilience. In rare cases, Vault residents overcame their conditions, adapting in ways Vault-Tec never predicted. Some vaults produced leaders, communities, or technologies that helped shape the wasteland long after the experiments ended. These outcomes were unintended, born not from Vault-Tec's planning, but from humanity's refusal to disappear quietly. Even in controlled environments designed to strip away agency, people found ways to assert their identity, to choose cooperation over cruelty, and to survive despite everything stacked against them. Vault-Tec's influence extends far beyond the vaults themselves. Their technology, philosophies, and mistakes shaped the post-war world in subtle ways. The very concept of shelter, isolation, and controlled survival echoes throughout the wasteland in bunkers, factions, and institutions that inherited Vault-Tec's mindset. The idea that safety requires separation, that control ensures survival, persists long after Vault-Tec itself vanished. Fallout uses this legacy to explore a deeper question: whether humanity's greatest threat was ever the bombs at all, or the belief that people could be reduced to variables in a plan. As you move through the wasteland and descend into these forgotten vaults, the atmosphere shifts. The surface world is chaotic and dangerous, but it is honest in its unpredictability. The vaults, by contrast, are quiet, sterile, and heavy with intention. Their corridors hum softly, with machines still performing duties assigned centuries ago. Their walls are lined with instructions that no longer matter. Their silence feels deliberate, as though the vaults themselves are waiting for something that will never arrive. Fallout's portrayal of Vault-Tec transforms these spaces into more than dungeons or locations. They become psychological landscapes, reflections of a world that chose control over trust. In this way, Vault-Tec's story is not just about the past, it is a warning carried forward through time, whispered through cracked terminals and flickering lights, a reminder that survival without compassion leads to emptiness, that preparation without humanity becomes cruelty. And as the vault doors remain sealed or rusted open across the wasteland, they stand quietly beneath the earth, holding the echoes of lives that believed they were being saved, never knowing the true cost of Vault-Tec's vision. The vaults sleep now, their experiments long concluded or still running in isolation, their lessons scattered across generations of survivors. And as you drift through these stories, through these buried chambers of controlled hope and engineered despair, Vault-Tec's legacy unfolds slowly, not as a single revelation, but as a quiet accumulation of truths waiting patiently to be remembered. The deeper story of Vault-Tec continues not through grand revelations, but through the quiet consistency of its methods, repeated again and again beneath different patches of earth. As more vaults are uncovered across the wasteland, a pattern slowly becomes impossible to ignore. Vault-Tec did not design chaos randomly. Each vault was part of a vast, carefully structured network of controlled environments meant to simulate countless versions of human survival under artificial conditions. Together, they formed a massive experiment spanning an entire continent, one that treated the end of the world not as a tragedy to be prevented, but as an opportunity to collect data on a scale never before possible. Vault-Tec's partnership with the pre-war United States government was central to this vision. While the public believed Vault-Tec was a private corporation acting in the nation's best interest, internal records suggest a far deeper integration. Government agencies viewed the Vault system as a testing ground for extreme scenarios that could never be ethically approved in open society. The looming threat of nuclear war provided justification for actions that would otherwise have been unthinkable. Under the guise of national security, Vault-Tec was given immense autonomy, funding, and secrecy, allowing it to operate beyond public scrutiny while shaping the future of human survival in secret. Many of the Vault experiments focused on psychological stress, testing how isolation, confinement, and artificial authority structures would affect human behavior over long periods of time. Some vaults manipulated leadership by installing overseers with contradictory or impossible instructions. Others altered social dynamics by enforcing rigid class systems, unequal access to resources, or constant surveillance. Vault-Tec's interest was not in whether people survived comfortably, but in how power, fear, and scarcity reshaped identity when escape was impossible. The vaults became pressure chambers for the human mind, sealed environments where stress could be intensified and measured with precision. In several vaults, Vault-Tec tested the effects of prolonged isolation from reality itself. Residents were denied any information about the outside world, leaving them uncertain whether the surface had recovered or if it remained lethal. Over time, this uncertainty became more damaging than radiation ever could have been. Vault logs describe growing paranoia, obsession with routine, and the gradual breakdown of trust. Without an external reference point, reality itself became fragile, shaped entirely by what Vault-Tec allowed residents to know. These vaults demonstrate one of Vault-Tec's most unsettling conclusions: that uncertainty can be as destructive as direct harm. Other vaults focused on biological and genetic outcomes, intentionally creating conditions that would stress human physiology across generations. Limited populations, controlled reproduction, and restricted gene pools were implemented to observe long-term effects on health, behavior, and adaptability. Vault-Tec assumed that humanity's future might require survival in sealed environments for centuries, perhaps aboard spacecraft or on distant planets. In this context, the Vault Dwellers were prototypes, their bodies and minds shaped to test whether humanity could endure confinement indefinitely. The ethical cost of this research was never part of Vault-Tec's calculations. Vault-Tec also experimented heavily with authority and obedience. In some vaults, overseers were given absolute power with no accountability, while in others, authority was deliberately undermined or removed entirely. These experiments examined whether humans gravitated toward hierarchy when stability was threatened or whether they fractured without structure. Vault logs reveal that in many cases, residents initially accepted extreme authority if it promised safety, only to rebel later when control became oppressive. Vault-Tec observed these cycles without intervention, documenting each rise and collapse as valuable data. One of the most disturbing aspects of Vault-Tec's design philosophy is how disposable vault populations were considered. Many experiments were designed with failure in mind, assuming that loss of life was an acceptable outcome if data could be collected beforehand. Automated systems continued recording long after vaults descended into chaos, preserving final messages, biometric readings, and environmental data. Vault-Tec did not intend to rescue failing vaults. The end of an experiment was simply another result to be logged. Yet even within this bleak framework, Vault-Tec underestimated one variable it could never fully control: human adaptability. In some vaults, residents subverted the experiments entirely, finding ways to cooperate, resist, or reinterpret their conditions. Communities formed cultures unique to their confinement, developing rituals, values, and coping mechanisms that allowed them to endure far longer than Vault-Tec predicted. These outcomes were not celebrated by Vault-Tec, but they stand as quiet proof that humanity cannot be fully engineered, no matter how controlled the environment. As centuries passed, Vault-Tec itself ceased to exist as an active force, but its systems continued operating autonomously. Overseer terminals followed outdated protocols. Maintenance robots repaired systems no longer needed. Vault doors remained sealed long after the experiments they protected had concluded. This persistence reveals another unintended consequence of Vault-Tec's ambition. It built machines and systems capable of outlasting the people who designed them, leaving behind structures that continued their purpose without understanding why. When vaults were eventually breached by wastelanders, the discoveries were often deeply unsettling. Some vaults were eerily intact, their residents long dead, their final moments preserved in place. Others were completely overrun, transformed into nests for mutated creatures or fortified strongholds for post-war factions. A few vaults continued functioning, their populations unaware that the world above had changed irreversibly. Each vault told a different story, yet all shared a common origin rooted in deception and control. Vault-Tec's technology left a lasting mark on the post-war world. Life support systems, water purification, and energy infrastructure from vaults became templates for survival elsewhere. Ironically, the same systems used to imprison vault dwellers later helped sustain settlements across the wasteland. Fallout presents this contradiction quietly, showing how tools created for unethical purposes can still produce unintended good when separated from their original intent. The legacy of Vault-Tec also lives on through ideology. Many post-war factions inherited its belief that humanity must be guided, controlled, or isolated to survive. Bunkers, enclaves, and secretive organizations echo Vault-Tec's worldview, often repeating its mistakes without realizing their origin. Fallout uses Vault-Tec not merely as a villainous corporation, but as a symbol of a civilization that believed survival could be engineered without empathy. As you descend into vaults scattered across the wasteland, the atmosphere carries a distinct weight. Unlike the surface, where chaos is open and honest, the vaults feel carefully arranged, every corridor shaped by intention. The lighting hums softly. The walls are clean but worn. The silence feels deliberate. These spaces are not ruins of war, but ruins of planning, remnants of a future designed too precisely to allow for humanity's unpredictability. Vault-Tech's story unfolds slowly, through fragments rather than declarations. It is revealed in terminal logs written late at night, in overseer messages filled with doubt, in final recordings left behind by residents who realized too late what they had agreed to. Fallout does not rush these discoveries. It allows them to accumulate, layering understanding gently until the full weight of Vault-Tech's actions becomes clear. In the end, Vault-Tech represents a chilling truth at the heart of Fallout's world. The apocalypse did not begin with nuclear fire. It began with a belief that humanity could be reduced to data, that control could replace trust, and that survival justified any cost. The vaults remained scattered beneath the earth, sealed or broken, their experiments concluded or endlessly repeating, quiet reminders of a future that was planned in secret and paid for by those who believed they were being saved. And as you drift through these underground halls, past flickering lights and dormant machines, Vault-Tech's legacy settles softly into the silence, not as a single moment of horror, but as a long, slow echo of choices made when the world still thought it had time. Vault-Tech's influence does not end with the experiments themselves. Long after the corporation vanished, its presence continues to shape the world through the systems it left behind and the assumptions it embedded into human survival. The vaults were not isolated failures or successes. They were fragments of a single philosophy carried forward through time, quietly guiding how people thought about safety, isolation, and control. Even when the original intent is forgotten, the structure remains, influencing decisions made centuries later by people who never knew Vault-Tech's name. One of the most revealing aspects of Vault-Tech's legacy is how thoroughly it relied on automation. Many vaults were designed to function with minimal human oversight, trusting machines to maintain life support, enforce experimental parameters, and record outcomes indefinitely. These systems were built to persist even if every resident died, and many did exactly that. Maintenance robots continued polishing floors in empty corridors. Overseer terminals waited patiently for commands that would never come. Environmental controls regulated air for no one at all. In this way, Vault-Tech created environments where intention outlived humanity, where purpose continued long after meaning had vanished. This reliance on automation reflects a broader pre-war mindset. Vault-Tech did not trust people to adapt freely. It trusted systems, protocols, and rigid planning. Human behavior was something to be measured, constrained, and corrected rather than understood. Fallout's vaults reveal how dangerous this belief becomes when circumstances change. Machines cannot reinterpret morality. They cannot question assumptions. They only execute instructions, even when those instructions lead to suffering or extinction. The vaults that failed most catastrophically were often the ones where automation was most absolute. In several vaults, the overseer was not truly in control at all. While residents believed the overseer was responsible for decisions, the reality was often reversed. Overseers were given instructions designed to manipulate outcomes rather than ensure safety. Some were instructed to maintain impossible conditions. Others were given contradictory orders meant to create stress and conflict. Vault-Tech understood that authority itself could be a variable, and that those placed in power could be as much a subject of experimentation as those they governed. The overseer became both jailer and prisoner, trapped within a role designed to fail. The psychological toll of this structure becomes clear through overseer logs found throughout the Fallout series. Many begin with confidence, optimism, and loyalty to Vault-Tech's mission. Over time, these logs shift in tone. Doubt appears, guilt emerges. Some overseers begin to question the morality of their orders, while others retreat into justification, convincing themselves that suffering is necessary for the greater good. Fallout presents these records without commentary, allowing the listener to experience the slow erosion of certainty firsthand. Vault-Tec also engineered ignorance as a tool. In many vaults, residents were intentionally denied accurate information about the outside world. Reports were delayed, censored, or fabricated entirely. This information control prevented organized resistance and ensured that vault dwellers focused inward rather than questioning their confinement. Over generations, this isolation distorted reality itself. Children born underground accepted artificial conditions as normal, never knowing that the surface world, however dangerous, still existed. Vault-Tec did not simply trap people physically, it trapped them psychologically, shaping their understanding of existence itself. Some vaults experimented with cultural manipulation, altering education, entertainment, or belief systems to observe how identity formed in sealed environments. Approved media reinforced obedience or optimism. Dissenting ideas were subtly discouraged. In these vaults, Vault-Tec sought to understand whether culture itself could be engineered, whether beliefs could be shaped as easily as behavior. The results were mixed. Some populations internalized the narratives they were given. Others resisted quietly, preserving forbidden knowledge or traditions in secret. Fallout treats these outcomes gently, emphasizing that culture is resilient even under extreme control. Over time, the distinction between experiment and environment began to blur. In vaults where systems failed partially rather than completely, residents adapted in unpredictable ways. Some reinterpreted their instructions creatively, others exploited loopholes in automated enforcement. These adaptations were never part of Vault-Tec's design, yet they often allowed populations to survive far longer than expected. Ironically, the more rigid the experiment, the more likely it was to collapse. The vaults that allowed even small degrees of flexibility often endured. When the vault doors finally opened, either through failure, force, or design, the results rippled outward into the wasteland. Vault dwellers emerged carrying knowledge, technology, and trauma shaped by artificial lives underground. Some became leaders, others became recluses. Some attempted to recreate vault conditions on the surface, building enclosed communities governed by strict rules. Others rejected confinement entirely, embracing the uncertainty of the wasteland as a form of freedom. Vault-Tec's experiments did not end when the doors opened. They continued through the people who survived them. The contrast between vault life and surface life is central to Fallout's exploration of humanity. The surface is dangerous, unpredictable, and often cruel, but it is honest in its chaos. The vaults, by contrast, are orderly, controlled, and deeply deceptive. Fallout does not present one as purely superior to the other. Instead, it asks a quieter question. Which form of survival allows humanity to remain human? The answer is never stated outright. It is left to be felt through experience. Vault-Tec's name becomes almost mythological in the post-war world, spoken with bitterness, confusion, or disbelief by those who uncover its secrets. To many wastelanders, the vaults are simply strange ruins filled with danger and mystery. To others, They are sources of advanced technology or shelter. Very few understand the full scope of what Vault-Tec attempted. This partial understanding mirrors Vault-Tec's original deception. Just as vault dwellers were never given the full truth, the wasteland inherits only fragments of Vault-Tec's intent. The corporation's legacy is also preserved in the way people continue to seek safety through isolation. Bunkers, secure compounds, and hidden facilities across the wasteland echo Vault-Tec's core belief that separation equals survival. Fallout repeatedly shows how these spaces often fail in similar ways, falling victim to internal conflict, resource scarcity, or ideological rigidity. Vault-Tec's greatest experiment may not have been the vaults themselves, but the idea that humanity could survive by sealing itself away from its own nature. As you move through these stories, the vaults begin to feel less like isolated horrors and more like mirrors held up to the past. They reflect a society that valued control over compassion, data over dignity, and preparation over trust. Vault-Tec did not invent these values. It amplified them, giving them concrete form beneath the earth. Fallout uses this amplification to explore how easily good intentions can be twisted when fear replaces empathy. There is a quiet sadness in the vaults that goes beyond their physical decay. It is the sadness of lives lived within parameters never chosen, of futures shaped by invisible hands. Yet there is also resilience here. Even in vaults designed to break people, humanity persisted. Friendships formed, families endured. Small acts of kindness occurred without expectation of reward. These moments were never part of the experiment, and perhaps that is why they matter most. The vaults remain scattered beneath the wasteland, some sealed, some broken, some still humming softly with power. They do not scream their history. They wait. Each one holds a story shaped by design and deviation, by control and resistance. And as you drift through these underground corridors, past doors marked with numbers and promises long expired, Vault-Tec's legacy settles gently into the silence, not as a single villainous act, but as a slow, systemic failure born from the belief that humanity could be managed rather than understood. In this stillness, the truth becomes clear without needing to be spoken. Survival is not something that can be engineered perfectly. It is something lived, imperfectly, through choice, connection, and adaptation. The vaults tried to remove those elements, and in doing so, revealed just how essential they truly are. Vault-Tec's story grows heavier the longer it is observed, not because it becomes more shocking, but because its logic becomes clearer. The corporation did not act out of chaos or madness. It acted with calm intention, believing that survival could be optimized, standardized, and controlled. This belief shaped every vault blueprint, every overseer instruction, and every automated protocol buried beneath the earth. Vault-Tec did not see itself as cruel. It saw itself as necessary. And that conviction, more than any single experiment, defines its place in Fallout's world. At the core of Vault-Tec's philosophy was the assumption that humanity could not be trusted to endure catastrophe without guidance. Fear, emotion, and individuality were treated as variables to be managed rather than traits to be respected. Vault-Tec planners believed that if conditions were controlled tightly enough, human behavior could be predicted, corrected, and refined. In this view, suffering was not a failure. It was data. Loss was not tragedy. It was outcome. The vaults were never meant to preserve life as it existed, but to reshape it into something Vault-Tec believed would survive longer, quieter, and more obediently. This mindset explains why so many vault experiments focus not on physical survival, but on psychological strain. Vault-Tec understood that food, water, and air could be engineered reliably. The human mind, however, was far less predictable. How people reacted to isolation, authority, uncertainty, and loss was the true unknown Vault-Tec sought to measure. By sealing populations underground and manipulating their environment, Vault-Tec created closed systems where emotional responses could be observed without interference from the outside world. In vaults where social pressure was intensified, residents often clung to routine as a form of comfort. Schedules became sacred, rules were obeyed even when they no longer made sense. Fallout's vault logs show how structure can become a substitute for meaning when choice is removed. People followed instructions not because they believed in them, but because obedience provided stability in a world where nothing else could be trusted. Vault-Tec recorded these behaviors carefully, interpreting compliance as success rather than as a sign of quiet desperation. Other vaults explored what happened when structure was removed entirely. Without clear leadership or enforced hierarchy, residents were forced to negotiate their own systems of order. Some vaults fractured quickly, descending into violence as individuals competed for control. Others formed surprisingly cooperative societies, distributing resources and responsibilities through shared agreement. Vault-Tec treated both outcomes as equally valuable data, uninterested in moral judgment. What mattered was not whether people thrived, but how they responded under pressure. The role of the overseer reveals much about Vault-Tec's view of authority. Overseers were often chosen not for empathy or leadership skill, but for their willingness to follow instructions without question. Some were unaware of the true nature of their vault's experiment until it was too late. Others were fully informed and accepted their role, believing they were serving a greater purpose. Fallout's records show how this position isolated overseers from their communities, placing them in a constant state of moral tension. They were meant to enforce rules that cause suffering, yet live among those they harmed. Vault-Tec observed these internal conflicts with clinical interest. Over time, many overseers began to rationalize their actions. Logs reveal language shifting from uncertainty to justification, from doubt to detachment. Suffering became abstract. Residents became numbers. This emotional distancing mirrors Vault-Tec's own corporate mindset, scaled down to an individual level. Fallout uses these logs to show how systems of control perpetuate themselves, not through overt cruelty, but through gradual normalization of harm. Information control remained one of Vault-Tec's most powerful tools. By regulating what residents knew about the outside world, Vault-Tec shaped perception as effectively as it shaped environment. Some vaults were told the surface remained deadly long after it had stabilized. Others were given false hope of imminent release to maintain compliance. In both cases, uncertainty eroded trust and autonomy. Fallout demonstrates how truth, when withheld or distorted, becomes another form of confinement. Generational vaults reveal perhaps the most unsettling outcomes of this strategy. Children born underground inherited rules and fears they never consented to. They learned to accept confinement as normal, danger as abstract, and authority as permanent. For them, the vault was not a shelter, it was the world. Vault-Tec's experiments did not just test individuals. They reshaped entire cultures before they had a chance to form freely. Fallout treats this generational impact with quiet gravity, allowing the listener to feel the weight of lives shaped without choice. Yet even within these conditions, humanity persisted in small, defiant ways. Vault residents created art, told stories, and formed bonds that existed outside official structures. Secret friendships developed. Unauthorized traditions emerged. These acts were rarely dramatic, but they mattered. They represented moments where people reclaimed agency within systems designed to remove it. Vault-Tec did not plan for these outcomes and often did not value them, yet they stand as some of the most meaningful parts of Vault history. When Vault systems finally failed or doors opened, the transition to the surface was often traumatic. Vault dwellers emerged into a world utterly unlike anything they had been taught to expect. Some were unprepared for danger and chaos. Others embraced the freedom immediately, rejecting confinement with fierce intensity. Fallout shows how Vault life left lasting imprints on those who survived it, shaping how they interacted with the wasteland and with others. The Vault did not end when the door opened. It followed its residents into the world above. Vault-Tec's technological achievements cannot be ignored. Life support systems, radiation shielding, and long-term habitation infrastructure were remarkable feats of engineering. Ironically, these same systems later became lifelines for the wasteland. Water purifiers, power systems, and medical technologies salvaged from vaults helped rebuild settlements and sustain communities. Fallout presents this contradiction quietly, showing how tools born from unethical intent can still be repurposed for good when removed from their original framework. The name Vault-Tec fades over time, but its influence remains embedded in the wasteland's architecture and thinking. Bunkers, underground facilities, and isolationist ideologies continue to appear, echoing Vault-Tec's belief that safety comes from separation. Fallout repeatedly shows how these ideas often fail in similar ways, collapsing under internal pressure rather than external threat. The vaults serve as cautionary monuments, not because they were underground, but because they were built on mistrust. As you move through these stories, the vaults begin to feel less like experiments and more like echoes of a worldview that could not imagine survival without control. Vault-Tec believed humanity needed to be managed to endure the future. Fallout gently challenges this belief by showing that the most enduring survivors are often those who adapt, connect, and choose empathy even in broken circumstances. The vault corridors remain quiet now, their experiments concluded or endlessly looping, their lessons waiting patiently beneath the earth. Machines hum softly, lights flicker, doors remain sealed or rusted open. Each vault holds a story shaped by intention and resistance, by planning and unpredictability. And as you drift through these spaces, the weight of Vault-Tec's legacy settles gently, not as anger or fear, but as understanding. In that understanding, a quiet truth emerges. Humanity does not survive because it is controlled. It survives because it is resilient, imperfect, and capable of choosing connection even when systems try to remove it. Vault-Tec tried to engineer the future and instead revealed the limits of control. The vaults remain as silent witnesses to that lesson, resting beneath the wasteland, waiting to be remembered. As time drifts onward, Vault-Tec's legacy begins to feel less like a collection of isolated experiments and more like a single, unified mindset that shaped the final years before the world fell. The vaults were not created in desperation at the last moment. They were planned carefully, funded generously, and constructed with confidence. Vault-Tec believed the end of the world was not only survivable, but manageable, provided humanity was guided correctly. This confidence is what makes their story so unsettling. They did not panic when the future darkened. They prepared to control it. The corporation's confidence rested on the belief that systems were superior to people. Vault-Tec trusted procedures more than empathy, models more than morality. Human unpredictability was seen as a flaw to be corrected rather than a strength to be understood. Every vault reinforced this belief by attempting to remove uncertainty from survival. Air, water, food, leadership, information, even social interaction were regulated. In doing so, Vault-Tec attempted to reduce life itself to a series of manageable inputs and outputs. What the vaults reveal, centuries later, is how deeply flawed that assumption was. Human behavior does not stabilize under extreme control. It fractures, adapts, resists, and reshapes itself in ways no model can fully anticipate. Vault after vault demonstrates this truth quietly. In places where Vault-Tec tightened its grip the hardest, collapse often came sooner. Where small freedoms slipped through the cracks, people endured longer, sometimes long enough to reclaim their lives entirely. The pre-war obsession with preparedness runs through every Vault-Tec record that survives. Meetings, memos, and internal communications emphasize contingency planning above all else. Every scenario had a protocol. Every failure had a backup. Yet what these records never account for is compassion. There are no plans for grief, no allowances for trauma, no protocols for dignity. Vault-Tec prepared endlessly for physical survival while ignoring the emotional cost of confinement. Fallout presents this omission, not with outrage, but with quiet clarity. Vault-Tec's relationship with time is also revealing. The corporation planned in decades and centuries, assuming continuity where none was guaranteed. Many vaults were designed to remain sealed long after their creators were gone, their experiments running on inertia alone. This long view allowed Vault-Tec to justify immense suffering in the present for hypothetical benefits in a distant future. Fallout uses this temporal distance to explore how easily responsibility dissolves when consequences are postponed beyond one's lifetime. Inside the vaults, time behaved differently. Days were measured by schedules rather than sunlight. Seasons did not exist. Generations passed without natural markers of change. This artificial sense of time reshaped identity itself. Vault dwellers often struggled to imagine life beyond routine, beyond the rules that defined every moment. Even when vault doors opened, many found freedom overwhelming rather than liberating. The vault had taught them how to survive, but not how to choose. Some vault populations never learned the truth of their confinement. Automated systems failed gradually, leaving residents in decaying environments without explanation. Others learned too much too quickly, discovering that their suffering had been intentional. Fallout shows how both ignorance and revelation can be equally damaging when truth arrives without agency. Vault-Tec controlled information so completely that when control finally collapsed, the emotional fallout was as devastating as any physical danger. The contrast between vault life and the surface world becomes more pronounced as these stories accumulate. The wasteland is harsh, but it allows choice. Danger is visible. Consequences are immediate. Vaults, by contrast, conceal danger behind structure and routine. Fallout does not romanticize the surface, but it presents openness, even chaos, as more honest than engineered safety. This contrast becomes one of the series' quiet philosophical anchors. Vault-Tec's influence extended beyond human experimentation into technology itself. Vault systems were designed to be self-sustaining, adaptable to damage, and resistant to failure. Ironically, this resilience ensured that many experiments continued long after they should have ended. Machines repaired environments no longer suitable for life. Systems enforced protocols long after populations were gone. In this way, Vault-Tec created environments that outlived their purpose, turning shelters into mausoleums maintained by tireless automation. When survivors from vaults entered the wasteland, they carried more than technology and knowledge. They carried expectations shaped by confinement. Some sought to recreate vault-like order, building rigid communities that valued control above flexibility. Others rejected structure entirely, embracing uncertainty with fierce determination. Fallout presents these divergent paths as echoes of Vault-Tec's experiments, rippling outward into the world long after the vault doors opened. The idea of the Overseer lingers as a symbol of this legacy. Overseers were meant to represent stability and leadership, yet their authority was often artificial, imposed by design rather than trust. In the Wasteland, leadership emerges differently. It is earned through action, protection, and presence. Fallout quietly contrasts these models, suggesting that authority rooted in relationship endures longer than authority rooted in control. Vault-Tec's name fades from common knowledge, but its symbols remain: the blue and yellow color scheme, the vault numbers stamped into steel, the smiling mascot frozen in perpetual optimism. These artifacts become relics stripped of context, their original meaning lost. To Wastelanders, vaults are mysteries, dangers, or opportunities. Few understand the philosophy that created them, yet that philosophy persists in subtler forms, shaping how people think about safety and survival. As you drift through these stories, a pattern emerges without needing to be stated. The vaults were never about saving humanity as it was. They were about redefining humanity under constraint. Fallout allows this realization to surface gently through repetition rather than revelation. Each vault adds another layer, another perspective, until the truth feels less like a shock and more like an inevitability. There is no single moment where Vault-Tec is exposed or defeated. Its legacy dissolves slowly, eroded by time and by the resilience of those who outlived it. The corporation disappears, but its questions remain. Can survival justify control? Can safety exist without freedom? Can humanity be engineered without losing what makes it human? Fallout does not answer these questions directly. It allows them to linger, carried quietly through the wasteland. The vaults remain beneath the earth, sealed chambers of intention and consequence. Some are silent forever. Others hum softly, systems still running without purpose. Each one is a fragment of a future that was planned too carefully and trusted people too little. And as you move through these underground spaces, through their echoes and stillness, Vault-Tec's story settles gently into understanding rather than outrage. In that understanding, a final truth becomes clear without needing emphasis. Humanity survives not because it is controlled, but because it adapts, connects, and chooses meaning even in broken circumstances. Vault-Tec tried to remove uncertainty from survival, and instead revealed how essential uncertainty truly is. The vaults rest now as quiet reminders of that lesson, sleeping beneath the wasteland, their stories waiting patiently to be heard. Vault-Tec's story becomes quieter as it moves further from the moment of creation and closer to the long aftermath, where consequences matter more than intention. By this point, the corporation itself is gone, its executives, planners, and architects erased by the same war they believed they could outlast. What remains is not an organization, but a network of sealed spaces and automated decisions still unfolding long after anyone is left to care. Vault-Tec's absence is almost as unsettling as its presence once was. The systems continue without supervision, the experiments persist without observers, and the results ripple outward into a world that never agreed to participate. Many vaults were designed with no clear endpoint. There was no defined moment when success would be declared, no plan for reintegration into the surface world. Vault-Tec assumed that future authorities, perhaps remnants of government, perhaps Vault-Tec itself reborn, would one day return to collect the data and decide humanity's fate. That moment never came. As a result, the vaults became places suspended outside history, running experiments for an audience that no longer existed. Fallout presents this abandonment quietly, through terminals that await responses, status reports that are never acknowledged, and systems that continue to log data into the void. This lack of closure had profound effects on the people inside. In vaults where systems remained functional, residents often waited for instructions that never arrived. Generations lived and died believing release was imminent, that compliance would eventually be rewarded. In other vaults, residents realized too late that there was no one left to answer their questions. Fallout shows how hope, when manipulated and indefinitely delayed, can become a form of captivity as powerful as any locked door. The few vaults that were designed as true control vaults, meant to operate normally without extreme experimentation, reveal another layer of Vault-Tec's legacy. These vaults demonstrate that even under ideal conditions, long-term isolation carries a cost. Communities stagnated culturally, innovation slowed, identity narrowed. When Control Vault dwellers eventually emerged, many struggled to adapt to the openness and unpredictability of the wasteland. Fallout uses these examples to suggest that survival alone is not enough. Growth requires uncertainty, challenge, and exposure to the wider world. Vault-Tec's technological sophistication made these environments feel safe on the surface. Clean corridors, stable temperatures, reliable food sources, and medical care all contributed to an illusion of security. But beneath that, stability was fragility. Vault systems were never meant to accommodate human complexity indefinitely. When even one system failed social, mechanical, or psychological, the effects cascaded. Fallout repeatedly shows how tightly coupled systems collapse dramatically once stress exceeds design limits. The long-term psychological effects of vault life appear again and again in the wasteland. Former vault dwellers often display rigid thinking, difficulty with trust, and an intense reliance on structure. Some become natural leaders, accustomed to hierarchy and responsibility. Others withdraw, overwhelmed by the freedom and chaos of the surface. These traits are not framed as weaknesses, but as adaptations shaped by artificial environments. Fallout treats these characters with empathy, showing how survival conditions leave marks that do not fade when danger passes. Vault-Tec's experiments also influenced how the wasteland understands technology. Vault systems were among the most advanced pre-war creations to survive relatively intact, making them objects of fascination and fear. Settlements that discovered vault technology often treated it with reverence, sometimes misunderstanding its purpose or limitations. Fallout shows how tools divorced from context can be misused or mythologized, carrying authority simply because they appear advanced. In some cases, vaults became symbols rather than shelters. Raiders occupied them, using their defenses to dominate surrounding regions. Cult-like groups formed around vaults, interpreting their architecture and symbols as signs of divine protection or destiny. These interpretations were never part of Vault-Tec's plan, yet they demonstrate how meaning fills the void left when truth is buried. Fallout uses these outcomes to show that control does not end when planners disappear. It mutates, shaped by whoever inherits the structure. The number stamped on each vault door becomes a quiet reminder of this fragmentation. Each number represents a different assumption about humanity, a different hypothesis tested without consent. Together, they form a catalog of fear, ambition, and hubris. No single vault explains Vault-Tec's intent completely. Only by encountering many does the pattern emerge, slowly and unmistakably. Vault-Tec's most enduring mistake was not cruelty, but certainty. The belief that humanity could be predicted well enough to justify manipulation. Fallout repeatedly undermines this belief by showing that the most successful survivors are those who adapt rather than conform, who connect rather than isolate. Communities on the surface endure not because they are controlled, but because they respond to change as it comes. As time passes, vaults degrade unevenly. Some collapse physically, their doors breached by erosion or violence. Others remain pristine, sealed monuments to unfinished experiments. In both cases, the silence inside feels deliberate, shaped by planning rather than accident. Fallout's vaults are not ruins in the traditional sense. They are artifacts of intention, spaces where every choice was made in advance and lived out by people who never agreed to the terms. The absence of vault tech raises a final, unsettling question. If no one remains to collect the data, what was it all for? Fallout never answers this directly. Instead, it lets the question linger, echoing through empty corridors and forgotten terminals. The vaults exist now not as steps toward a future, but as warnings left behind by a past that believed it could outthink human nature. In the wasteland, survival has taken a different shape. It is messy, dangerous, and often unfair, but it allows for choice. People fail openly. They succeed imperfectly. They learn through experience rather than design. Fallout presents this contrast gently, suggesting that freedom, even when painful, preserves something essential that no controlled environment ever could. The vaults rest beneath the earth, holding their stories in steel and concrete. Their experiments have ended or run endlessly without purpose. Their residents are gone, changed, or scattered across the wasteland. Vault tech itself has faded into myth, its intentions reconstructed from fragments and scars. What remains is not data, but memory. And in that memory, a quiet understanding settles. Humanity does not endure because it is planned perfectly. It endures because it adapts, questions, and chooses connection even when systems try to remove it. Vault-Tec tried to build a future without uncertainty, and instead revealed why uncertainty matters. The vaults remain as silent witnesses to that truth, sleeping beneath the ruined world, their lessons waiting patiently for anyone willing to listen. Vault-Tec's legacy grows softer at the edges the longer it is examined, not because it becomes less disturbing, but because it becomes more human in its consequences. What began as corporate ambition and governmental planning eventually dissolved into individual lives, shaped by confinement, expectation, and long silence. By this point in the story, Vault-Tec no longer feels like a single entity with intent, but like a ghost whose decisions continue to echo through places it can no longer reach. The vaults persist as spaces where time stalled, then fractured, leaving behind layers of meaning that only reveal themselves slowly. As centuries pass, many vaults become indistinguishable from the world above in one important way. They stop functioning as controlled environments and begin functioning as ruins. Systems fail, power flickers, maintenance routines break down. In these moments, the vaults lose their original authority. No longer pristine instruments of control, they become unstable spaces where residents must improvise or perish. Fallout uses these transitions to show how rigid planning collapses when adaptability becomes necessary, even underground. In vaults where residents survived long enough to witness this decay, the psychological impact was profound. The systems they had trusted began to betray them. Rules that once felt absolute became irrelevant. Overseer instructions no longer matched reality. Fallout shows how this breakdown often triggered existential crises among vault dwellers, forcing them to confront a truth they had been shielded from for generations. The vault was never permanent. It was never complete. It was only a delay. Some communities responded to this realization by clinging tighter to structure, enforcing rules more strictly as systems failed. Others abandoned protocol entirely, choosing cooperation and improvisation over obedience. These divergent responses highlight one of Fallout's central themes. When certainty collapses, people reveal what they truly value. Vault-Tec's experiments unintentionally expose this truth, even as they tried to suppress it. The role of technology shifts again in these later years. What was once seamless becomes fragile. Systems require human intervention to function at all. Residents learn how machines work not through manuals, but through trial and error. Fallout treats this learning process gently, showing how technology becomes a tool rather than an authority when people must understand it to survive. In these moments, the vaults begin to resemble the surface world more than Vault-Tec ever intended. For some vault populations, this transition becomes the catalyst for leaving. Vault doors are opened not because conditions are safe, but because staying no longer guarantees survival. Fallout often portrays these departures quietly, without drama or heroism. Families gather what they can. Individuals hesitate at thresholds. The outside world is unknown, dangerous, and overwhelming, yet it represents possibility. In contrast, the vault now represents certainty without future. Those who remain behind often do so, not out of fear, but out of attachment. The vault is the only world they have ever known. Its corridors hold memories, routines, and identities shaped over generations. Fallout shows that leaving confinement is not always liberation. It can also be loss. This complexity prevents the vaults from being reduced to simple symbols of oppression. They are also homes, however flawed, built around shared survival. When vault dwellers integrate into the wasteland, their influence spreads quietly. They bring with them technical knowledge, social structures, and deeply ingrained habits shaped by underground life. Some attempt to rebuild vault-like communities above ground, valuing predictability and order. Others reject structure entirely, having learned firsthand how control can suffocate. Fallout presents both responses with empathy, showing how experience shapes worldview rather than prescribing a correct path. Over time, vault technology becomes absorbed into the broader fabric of survival. Water purification systems are replicated, power infrastructure is adapted, medical technologies find new uses. These successes stand in stark contrast to the ethical failures that produce them. Fallout does not celebrate Vault-Tec for these contributions, but it acknowledges the complexity of inheritance. The wasteland survives using tools born from a system that failed morally, transforming them through context rather than intent. The idea of the vault shifts again as generations pass. For many wastelanders, vaults become legends rather than lived experiences. Stories grow exaggerated, rumors replace facts. Some believe vaults were safe havens that saved humanity. Others believe they were cursed places filled with monsters. Few understand the truth, and fewer still know that the truth lies somewhere between these extremes. Fallout allows this myth-making to unfold naturally, reflecting how history transforms into story when memory fades. Vault-Tec symbols persist in this mythologized form. The numbers, the doors, the cheerful imagery all remain, stripped of original meaning. To some, they represent safety. To others, danger. To many, they are simply relics of a lost world. Fallout uses this ambiguity to show how meaning is never fixed. It is shaped by experience, distance, and survival. As the vaults age, their silence changes. Early on, it felt controlled, deliberate. Now it feels worn, like the quiet of something that has been left behind. Lights flicker less frequently. Systems shut down one by one. Corridors grow darker. Fallout does not frame this decay as justice or punishment. It frames it as entropy, the natural outcome of structures built to resist change in a world defined by it. What remains consistent across all Vault stories is the presence of choice, even when limited. People choose how to respond to confinement. They choose how to treat one another. They choose whether to obey, resist, adapt, or leave. Vault-Tec tried to remove choice from survival, yet it could never fully succeed. Fallout's vaults quietly prove that even the most controlled environments cannot erase agency entirely. The corporation that once planned for centuries is now reduced to fragments, terminals with missing entries, blueprints without context, automated messages looping endlessly. Vault-Tec's voice echoes faintly through these remnants, not commanding, not guiding, but repeating promises no longer believed. Fallout lets this echo linger without resolution, allowing the listener to sit with the weight of what was attempted and what was lost. In the end, the vaults are neither purely evil nor purely tragic. They are lessons made physical, spaces where fear was given form and allowed to govern human lives. Yet within those spaces, humanity endured in ways that no plan could predict. Connection formed, meaning emerged, life persisted. As you drift through these final layers of Vault-Tec's story, the message settles gently rather than forcefully. Survival is not found in perfect systems or sealed doors. It is found in adaptability, in shared effort, in the willingness to face uncertainty together. The vaults remain beneath the earth, quiet now, their experiments concluded or forgotten, holding within them not answers, but understanding waiting patiently for anyone willing to listen long enough to hear it. Vault-Tec's legacy begins to thin here, not because its impact fades, but because it dissolves into the broader fabric of the wasteland itself. At this stage, the vaults no longer feel like isolated experiments waiting to be understood. They feel like foundations quiet, buried influences that helped shape how the post-war world learned to think about survival. The ideas Vault-Tec introduced did not remain underground. They surfaced slowly, carried upward by people, technology, and memory, blending into a world that no longer remembered where those ideas came from. In the centuries after the war, many survivors grew up hearing about vaults without ever seeing one. They became stories told around campfires, half-remembered myths of places where people slept through the end of the world. Some believed vault dwellers were lucky, spared the horrors of radiation and chaos. Others believed the vaults were tombs, sealed prisons filled with ghosts and monsters. Fallout shows how distance reshapes truth, turning lived experience into legend as generations pass. Those who did emerge from vaults often found themselves caught between worlds. They carried knowledge of advanced systems, medicine, and engineering, yet lacked experience with the wasteland's improvisational survival. Many struggled to reconcile the structured routines of vault life with the fluid, unpredictable reality of the surface. Fallout treats this transition with patience, showing how adaptation takes time and how identity can fracture when the environment that shaped it disappears. Vault-born communities that survived on the surface often influenced local culture in subtle ways. Their emphasis on organization, record-keeping, and infrastructure sometimes helped settlements stabilize. Water systems ran more efficiently, power was distributed more carefully, medical practices improved. Yet alongside these benefits came a lingering preference for control, a tendency to prioritize structure even when flexibility was needed. Fallout quietly illustrates how inherited philosophies can persist long after their origins are forgotten. Technology salvaged from vaults continued to circulate widely. Vault suits became common protective clothing. Pip-Boys turned into invaluable tools for navigation and survival. Power systems and purification equipment were replicated, adapted, and sometimes misunderstood. These devices outlived their creators, stripped of original intent and redefined by necessity. Fallout presents this technological afterlife without judgment, acknowledging both its usefulness and its origins in systems that failed morally. The idea of the sealed refuge never fully disappeared. Across the wasteland, people continued to build bunkers, fortified compounds, and hidden shelters, repeating Vault-Tec's belief that isolation equaled safety. Fallout repeatedly shows how these spaces often collapse from within, undone by mistrust, resource scarcity, or rigid ideology. In doing so, the series echoes the Vault's lesson quietly, without stating it outright. Safety created through exclusion rarely endures. As vaults aged further, many became part of the landscape rather than destinations. Doors rusted shut or were blown open long ago. Interiors collapsed or flooded. Some were stripped of anything valuable and left hollow. Others remained untouched, their silence growing heavier with time. Fallout treats these places not as puzzles to solve, but as memories embedded in stone and steel, asking for observation rather than action. The emotional weight of these spaces shifts as well. Early explorers experienced vaults as shocking revelations, places where cruelty and deception were freshly uncovered. Later generations encountered them as quiet remnants, their horrors muted by time. Fallout allows this emotional distance to exist, showing how even the most disturbing truths can fade into background noise when survival demands constant attention elsewhere. Yet fragments remain powerful: a final holotape, an overseer's last message, a terminal entry cut off mid-sentence. These small pieces of evidence carry disproportionate weight, reminding the listener that behind every system were individuals who felt fear, hope, doubt, and regret. Fallout consistently grounds Vault-Tec's legacy in these personal moments, ensuring that the story never becomes abstract or purely symbolic. The vault numbers themselves become almost poetic over time. Each one marks a different hypothesis, a different assumption about humanity. Taken together, they form a map of pre-war anxiety, revealing what society feared most at the moment it chose control over trust. Fallout never presents this map directly. It allows it to emerge gradually, through repetition and accumulation, as understanding settles in naturally. By now, Vault-Tec feels less like a villain and more like a warning. Not a warning about corporations or technology alone, but about certainty, about the belief that complex, emotional beings can be reduced to variables without consequence. Fallout uses the vaults to demonstrate that when systems are built without room for empathy, they may endure mechanically, but they fail humanly. The wasteland itself becomes the counter-argument to Vault-Tec's philosophy. It is chaotic, dangerous, and unfair, yet it allows adaptation. Communities rise and fall, alliances form and break. People learn through failure rather than design. Fallout does not idealize this world, but it presents it as honest. In contrast to the Vault's engineered environments, the surface offers authenticity, even when that authenticity is painful. As time stretches onward, Vault-Tec's direct influence continues to erode. Fewer people remember the name, fewer still understand the intent. What remains are patterns, repeated mistakes, repeated hopes, repeated attempts to create safety through control. Fallout invites the listener to recognize these patterns not as relics of the past, but as ongoing challenges that every generation faces in new forms. The vaults rest now as part of the earth, their steel shells slowly surrendering to time. They are no longer experiments, they are artifacts. Their lessons are no longer enforced. They are offered quietly, waiting for those willing to look beyond the surface of safety and question the cost of certainty. In this later quiet, Vault-Tec's story resolves not with judgment, but with understanding, Humanity survived not because of the vaults, but in spite of them. Survival emerged through connection, adaptation, and shared effort, not through sealed doors and rigid plans. Fallout leaves this realization unspoken, allowing it to settle gently rather than arrive as revelation. And as you drift away from these underground spaces, back into the open wasteland, the vaults remain behind, silent, patient, and unfinished. They do not demand condemnation or forgiveness. They simply exist as reminders of a future that was planned too carefully, and a present that learned, slowly and imperfectly, how to live without it. Vault-Tec's presence now feels almost fully absorbed into the background of the world, no longer a sharp outline, but a faint imprint beneath everything that came after. By this point, the vaults are less destinations and more echoes, places that once defined survival, but now exist as quiet reminders of a philosophy that could not endure unchanged. The wasteland has moved on, not by forgetting Vault-Tec entirely, but by folding its influence into something broader, messier, and far more human than anything the corporation ever planned. For many who roam the wasteland now, vaults are encountered unexpectedly rather than sought out. A heavy steel door half buried in earth, a number painted in fading yellow against concrete, a familiar blue glow leaking from a crack in the ground. These discoveries rarely come with context. Fallout allows these moments to feel incidental, emphasizing how the meaning of the vaults has shifted. What was once central to humanity's future is now simply part of the terrain, waiting quietly beneath rust and soil. Those who do enter vaults at this stage often experience something different than earlier generations did. The shock has softened. The horror is quieter. The corridors feel less like revelations and more like reflections. Systems hum weakly or remain silent altogether. Lights flicker sporadically, if at all. The vault no longer feels like an active participant in survival, but like a structure remembering what it once tried to be. Fallout uses this stillness to encourage contemplation rather than urgency. The stories left behind in these places are fragmentary, incomplete, and deeply personal. A child's drawing taped to a wall, a note written in haste and never delivered. An audio log filled with hesitation rather than certainty. These remnants feel intimate precisely because they are small. They do not explain Vault-Tec's grand design. They explain what it felt like to live inside it. Fallout consistently centers these moments, ensuring that the legacy of the vaults is understood through individual lives rather than abstract intent. The contrast between vault life and surface life has also softened with time. The wasteland, once chaotic and raw, has developed its own routines, traditions, and unspoken rules. Settlements rise, adapt, and sometimes fall, but they do so openly, shaped by shared experience rather than hidden design. Fallout presents this evolution gently, suggesting that humanity does not need perfect conditions to stabilize. It needs time, connection, and the freedom to change course when necessary. Vault-borne technology continues to circulate, but its symbolism has changed. Pip-Boys are tools, not promises. Vault suits are clothing, not identity. Water purifiers are infrastructure, not ideology. Fallout shows how objects once tied to control can lose their power when removed from the system that gave them meaning. Technology becomes neutral again, defined by use rather than origin. The philosophy Vault-Tec champions safety through isolation still appears, but more often as instinct than doctrine. People build walls, they fortify homes, they hide when danger grows too close. These actions are understandable, even necessary at times. Fallout does not condemn them. Instead, it gently reminds the listener that isolation is a response to fear, not a solution to survival. Communities that endure do so not by sealing themselves off completely, but by balancing caution with cooperation. Over time, the vaults lose their authority over imagination. They no longer represent the best or worst of humanity's future. They simply represent one attempt, shaped by fear and confidence in equal measure. Fallout allows this demystification to happen slowly, mirroring how societies reinterpret their past as they gain distance from it. What once seemed inevitable now feels avoidable. What once seemed necessary now feels flawed. The name Vault-Tec itself becomes rare, mentioned only in fragments of old data or half-remembered stories. For many, it is just another pre-war corporation. Among many, its significance diluted by time. Yet its fingerprints remain everywhere in architecture, in systems, in habits passed down unconsciously. Fallout uses this quiet persistence to show how ideas outlive institutions, shaping behavior long after their creators are gone. The vault's silence now feels different than before. It is not the silence of containment or control. It is the silence of abandonment, of places that have been outpaced by the world above. Fallout treats this silence with respect, allowing it to exist without forcing meaning onto it. These spaces no longer demand interpretation. They offer it, gently, to those willing to listen. As the wasteland continues to change, new generations grow up without any direct connection to the vaults at all. Their fears are different. Their hopes are shaped by immediate reality rather than inherited plans. Fallout suggests that this distance is not loss, but growth. Humanity is no longer living in the shadow of Vault-Tec's design. It is improvising its own future, imperfectly, but freely. In this later era, survival looks quieter and more organic. It is found in shared meals, in repaired fences, in stories told at night. It is found in mistakes made openly and lessons learned slowly. Fallout does not frame this as triumph. It frames it as continuation. Life goes on, not because it was engineered to, but because people choose to keep moving forward together. The vaults remain beneath the earth, sealed, broken, or forgotten. They no longer shape the future directly. They shape it indirectly, through lessons learned and mistakes not repeated. Fallout allows their story to conclude not with closure, but with integration. The vaults become part of the world's memory rather than its destiny. And as you drift away from these quiet remnants, back into open skies and uneven roads, Vault-Tec's story fades into the background where it belongs. Not erased, not forgiven, but understood. A chapter in humanity's long attempt to survive itself, written underground, read slowly, and finally left behind as the world continues on. Guided not by control, but by adaptation, connection, and the gentle persistence of life moving forward. Vault-Tec's story reaches a point where it no longer feels like something that happened, but something that slowly dissolved into everything that followed. At this stage, the vaults are no longer symbols that demand attention. They are quiet structures folded into the land. Their presence felt more in subtle habits than in physical discovery. The wasteland has absorbed their lessons, reshaped them, and moved forward in ways Vault-Tec never anticipated. What remains is not a system, but an echo soft, persistent, and increasingly distant. In the present world, survival rarely resembles the controlled environments Vault-Tec once promised. Life unfolds in uneven rhythms, shaped by weather, chance encounters, and shared effort. Communities form not because conditions are ideal, but because cooperation proves necessary. Fallout presents this contrast gently, showing how the surface world thrives not through perfect planning, but through flexibility. Where Vault-Tec relied on prediction, the wasteland relies on response. The vaults now feel like pauses in history rather than foundations for the future. They represent a moment when humanity tried to freeze itself in place, believing stability could be preserved by sealing away uncertainty. Time proved otherwise. Cultures evolved faster above ground than they ever could underground. Language shifted, traditions formed and faded. Fallout uses this contrast to suggest that survival requires movement, not preservation in amber. Many vault interiors now show signs of being lived in long after their original purpose ended. Walls repainted with symbols that mean nothing to outsiders. Rooms repurposed for uses never intended by their designers. These changes are subtle, but important. They show people reclaiming space from systems that once defined them. Fallout treats this reclamation quietly, emphasizing that meaning returns when people reshape their environment rather than submit to it. The emotional weight of Vault-Tec's actions softens further as time stretches on. Anger fades into understanding. Horror becomes history. This does not erase what happened, but it changes how it is carried. Fallout allows this emotional shift without minimizing harm, acknowledging that distance does not absolve wrongdoing, but it does alter how societies remember and learn. On the surface, remnants of vault culture appear in unexpected ways: an emphasis on record keeping, a preference for schedules, a lingering belief that safety must be engineered rather than shared. These habits persist even among those who never lived underground, passed down through stories and practices. Fallout uses these details to show how ideas migrate quietly, shaping behavior long after their origins are forgotten. At the same time, the Wasteland develops its own philosophies that run counter to Vault-Tec's worldview. Trust is built slowly and tested openly. Leadership is earned through action rather than title. Survival depends on adaptability rather than obedience. Fallout presents these principles not as ideals, but as patterns observed over time, emerging naturally from lived experience rather than imposed design. The vault doors themselves become powerful in their stillness. Some remain sealed forever, their interiors untouched. Others hang open, no longer separating anything at all. These doors no longer represent salvation or imprisonment. They represent choice, or the absence of it. Fallout allows their symbolism to fade naturally, reflecting how objects lose meaning when the context that gave them power disappears. As fewer people remember Vault-Tec directly, its story becomes less about blame and more about reflection. The vaults are no longer warnings shouted loudly. They are lessons whispered softly. Fallout does not demand that these lessons be learned all at once. It allows them to surface gradually, through repeated encounters with systems that fail when they try to control too much. The Wasteland continues to change in ways Vault-Tec never modeled. Communities merge, split, adapt, and evolve. No single structure defines survival. No plan remains permanent. Fallout treats this impermanence not as weakness, but as resilience. The ability to change course becomes the defining trait of endurance. In this later quiet, Vault-Tec's legacy finally finds its place, not as the architect of humanity's survival, but as a chapter in a longer story about fear, control, and the cost of certainty. The vaults rest now as artifacts of intent rather than engines of outcome. Their systems wind down, their corridors grow dark, their experiments conclude not with answers, but with understanding. What endures instead is something Vault-Tec could never manufacture: the willingness of people to adapt together, to share risk, to rebuild imperfectly. Fallout presents this truth without declaration, allowing it to settle naturally through repetition and contrast. Survival emerges not from sealed doors, but from open connection. As the world stretches onward, the vaults remain behind, quiet and patient beneath the earth. They no longer wait for rescue, evaluation, or redemption. They wait only as reminders of a time when humanity tried to outthink itself. And as you drift forward through the wasteland, leaving these places behind, their story fades gently into the background, understood, integrated, and finally released as life continues on, unplanned, imperfect, and enduring all the same. Vault-Tec's legacy now feels almost completely diffused, spread thin across time and memory until it no longer stands apart from the world it helped shape. The vaults still exist, sealed beneath layers of earth and history, but they no longer define survival in any direct way. Instead, they sit quietly as reminders of a moment when humanity believed it could design certainty into existence. The wasteland has since learned otherwise, not through theory or planning, but through lived experience, repeated across generations. In the present age of the wasteland, survival is rarely discussed in grand terms. People focus on immediate needs: clean water, safe shelter, trusted neighbors. These priorities arise naturally, without doctrine or centralized design. Fallout presents this shift gently, showing how life reorganizes itself once fear-driven planning gives way to practical cooperation. The vaults, once symbols of ultimate preparation, now feel distant from this grounded reality. Many who encounter vaults today do so without knowing their history. To them, a vault is simply a place sometimes dangerous, sometimes useful, sometimes empty. The deeper meanings have eroded with time. Fallout allows this erosion to happen without commentary, emphasizing how even the most carefully constructed legacies eventually lose their authority. What once felt monumental becomes ordinary, and what once promised salvation becomes just another ruin. Inside these spaces, decay continues its slow work. Walls peel, floors crack, systems fail quietly, one after another. The vaults no longer hum with purpose, only with residual motion. Fallout treats this decay not as punishment, but as inevitability. Structures built to resist change cannot do so forever. Time reaches even the most fortified designs. The stories left behind in vaults feel softer now, not because they are less tragic, but because they are further removed. Logs read like echoes rather than warnings. Voices preserved on holotapes sound distant, their urgency dulled by years of silence. Fallout allows these voices to remain intact, trusting the listener to feel their weight without needing emphasis. Above ground, humanity continues to redefine itself. Cultures form from fragments of the past, reshaped by necessity rather than design. Music changes, language shifts, traditions emerge organically. Fallout presents this cultural evolution as quiet progress, not advancement toward perfection, but movement away from stagnation. The world does not return to what it was. It becomes something else entirely. Vault-Tec's belief in control finds fewer adherents as generations pass. The wasteland teaches its own lessons, often harsh but immediate. Those who cling too tightly to rigid systems struggle to adapt. Those who remain flexible endure longer. Fallout uses this contrast repeatedly, showing how survival favors responsiveness over rigidity. Even the idea of safety transforms. It becomes less about walls and sealed doors, and more about relationships. Trust replaces structure. Shared effort replaces enforced compliance. Fallout does not idealize this shift. Danger remains constant, but it shows that resilience grows stronger when people face uncertainty together rather than hiding from it. The vaults themselves begin to feel almost peaceful in their abandonment. Without people, Without experiments, without expectation, they rest. The silence inside them is no longer oppressive. It is neutral. Fallout allows this neutrality to exist, signaling that the vaults have finally lost their power to shape lives directly. Occasionally, a vault door is reopened, not to escape disaster, but out of curiosity. These moments lack urgency. There is no rush, no fear of the surface. Fallout presents these discoveries as reflective rather than dramatic, emphasizing how far the world has moved from the mindset that created the vaults in the first place. The memory of vault tech continues to fade, replaced by lived experience. The corporation becomes a footnote rather than a focal point. Its intentions are debated less, its actions judged more quietly. Fallout suggests that this fading is not forgetfulness, but integration. The past becomes part of the present without dominating it. What remains strongest is the lesson Vault Tech never intended to teach: that survival cannot be perfected, that planning has limits, that humanity thrives not through control, but through adaptation, empathy, and shared uncertainty. Fallout never states this outright. It allows the world itself to demonstrate it again and again through contrast rather than declaration. As the wasteland stretches onward, the vaults sink deeper into history. They are no longer destinations or warnings. They are memories shaped into architecture, reminders of fear given form. And yet, even these reminders grow quiet with time, softened by distance, and repurposed by those who no longer live under their shadow. Life continues above them, imperfect and resilient. Communities rise and fall. Roads are walked. Stories are told. Fallout frames this continuation as the true legacy of humanity, not the sealed shelters beneath the earth, but the open, unfinished world above it. And so the vaults rest, their doors closed or broken, their systems fading into silence. Vault Tech's grand designs dissolve into the background, overtaken by a future it could never predict. In that future, survival is no longer engineered. It is lived, moment by moment, choice by choice, carried forward not by plans or protocols, but by people willing to adapt together as the world keeps moving on.